Welcome to the Top Floor Podcast. I'm your host, Darren Kanthal, and today we have Mr. Joe J.D. Durnford, the CEO of J.D. Ford & Company. Welcome, J.D.
Well, thank you, Darren. I really appreciate you having me on your podcast. I really looking forward to our conversation today, and hopefully adding some insight and maybe some good humor to your audience. And we'll thank everybody who's listening to this podcast for your time, and hope we can add some value to your day.
Awesome. All right, so you say humor. Can I tell you an off-color joke that's probably not appropriate, but close enough?
Well, I live in Puerto Rico, so be careful what you say.
That's well said. I'm not going to go that far. So here's the joke I heard recently. Did I tell you that I joined a nudist colony? The first week was really hard.
Well, I'm sure it's softened up since then.
Well played. Well played. Thank you for indulging me. I like telling stupid jokes.
Well, as long as you put forward the qualifier that it's stupid, we're good.
That's right. I sometimes am in front of the room as a trainer. I don't like that word because I'm not exactly a trainer, but you get the picture. And so instead of talking about the weather, I always ask people if they know jokes. And very few people can tell a joke these days. I know a few. And this one group that I was with them for 9 months. And the second time I came, like 3 or 4 people actually did some research and came with jokes that I then started keeping a whole notepad on my phone that's got, I don't even know, 50 jokes in there now. And so I'm a big fan of collecting these dumb dad jokes.
Well, I had a partner in my firm, J.D. Ford & Company, when we first started back in 1996, a fine gentleman named Ned Miner, a very well-known, well-regarded attorney in Colorado and nationally. And Ned was the master of the off-color joke that he would love to tell in the elevator or the golf course when it was just the guys. But sometimes humor is a great way to break the ice, and it's actually one of the things that I found to be advantageous when negotiating mergers and acquisitions. And sometimes things get tense, and if you can just find the sort of the spontaneous, kind of crack of a joke that breaks the ice, lets everybody cool down a lot, it does help move things forward. So humor is something that we need to keep at the forefront of our society, and I know that there's a lot of bad off-color jokes these days that as the comedians say, no one can take a joke these days, but very few can deliver one either. So hopefully we can all get back to some civility and good humor.
I'm really interested to hear about what it's like in these M&A rooms when you're going through these deals. Like, I'd love for you to paint us a picture, but before we get there, I'd love for you to introduce yourself first.
Sure. I'm Joe Durnford, JD, founder of JD Ford & Company. Started life in Colorado, growing up a kid in Colorado, and was initially an accountant, but never really had the personality of an accountant, or so I was told. But I always wanted to be in business for myself, and I always knew that accounting was the language of business, and I didn't want to have somebody else have to explain to me what was going on in my business. So I, at the advice of a football coach who was also my accounting professor or teacher, he said that accounting was a good profession. My father had died while I was in high school, and I didn't know that how I was going to make my way in the world. So accounting seemed like a fairly certain path to at least some level of middle class income and comfort, if not perhaps a pathway to something better. My marketing instructor at the time, or my teacher at high school, she said, "You don't have a personality for an accountant. You'll never make it." And I said, "Well, you watch me." And so fortunately for me, I was able to start my career at Deloitte Haskins & Sells, working in their emerging business consulting group, and was quickly brought into the transaction advisory group. I was fortunate that the lead partner for the private equity firm, the firm's worked, the private equity firm of KKR, joined the Denver office. And this was back in the day when we had very large computers and very large portable printers and very large work bags. And I was a good guy to have on the team because I could carry all the stuff. I'm a big guy, and so I could carry the work bag. So they put me on the M&A team, and I learned the the merger and acquisition business from the photocopy machine up, when we had data rooms that were actually real rooms where you had to go in and look through binders and do the analysis and bring things together. So I got my start in mergers and acquisitions back in 1986, 87 at Deloitte. Spent about 7 years doing that. Had this idea of starting a investment banking firm inside an accounting firm, so we could represent the sellers of businesses and not just be representing the buyers, private equity guys who were much more sophisticated than most of the companies that they were acquiring. And I wanted to level the playing field. I was told in no uncertain terms that we make a lot of money representing the private equity firms, and we're happy with that. So just keep your head down, and everything will work out great for you, Joe. I ended up not liking that answer. I got recruited to be a CFO of a client in the semiconductor business, and we spent about a year getting that company ready for sale, and sold that company. And like most good CFOs, I sold myself out of a job. And at 29 years old, I was recruited by Coopers & Lybrand, who had heard about my plan for an investment bank inside of an accounting firm, and they had that same idea, and other partners were pursuing it. So I was recruited to help in the formation of Coopers & Lybrand Securities, which is now PricewaterhouseCoopers Advisory Group. And so I did that for about 4 years, and things went well, and I was given the opportunity to be promoted and moved to New York, which at the time didn't sound like a very good idea. So my then wife and I, we had just started a family. We were both from Colorado, and we both wanted to stay in Colorado. And I traveled extensively, so it didn't make sense to her to go live in New York or Connecticut while I was gone 5 or 6 days a week. So I respectfully declined, and I was told that was not really an option. I didn't have a choice. I said, well, I do have a choice, and I chose to start J.D. Ford and Company. And I did have the good fortune of having some good initial supportive partners in Ned Miner and John Brown. Ned was a very prominent M&A attorney, and his partner John was a very prominent and sophisticated estate planning attorney. And John had written a book called How to Run Your Business So You Can Leave It in Style. And I read that book. I said, John, this is great, except for it talks about leaving it to trusts and will and to your kids and to your employees, but it misses the whole chapter on selling to a third party and cashing out. So we rewrote that book as second edition, and How to Run Your Business So You Can Leave in Style became our foundational document for how we approach the market. And we've had the great fortune of being able to work with hundreds of business owners, founders, family businesses over the last nearly 30 years in the middle market, and that's my story. I'm also a father of 4 children, a stepdad to 2, and I've got one of five brothers growing up. So I've had a great life.
Love it. Well, I too lost my dad when I was young, 21, so maybe a little bit older than you. And
Sorry for your loss.
Thank you. Same. And what I often say in these times is, sorry to be in the same shitty club.
Well, that as time goes on, you start to, at least in my case, see my father's life continuing in the lives of my brothers and my nephews and my nieces and my kids. So we're all on a spiritual, we're all spirits on a human journey, and ultimately, this too shall pass, and hopefully we'll all be reunited in the spiritual realm.
I appreciate that. Similar story too. I don't have biological kids, but my brother does and my sister does. So our lineage and our name lives on. And there's a reason I named my company the Kanthal Group. Also name recognition. And my dad was very proud of his name, our name. And he also had a business of the same name. So
Excellent.
So I guess I took it from him, I guess.
So you're the son of an entrepreneur.
Yes, I am. Yes.
Yeah. Well, that probably no surprise that you're an entrepreneur yourself. Many of the businesses that we've had the pleasure to represent, work with, and advise over these years have been second generation family members that took over the business from their parents. And just before this podcast, I was on a call with a very successful woman CEO who took over the business, bought it from her parents, and she's grooming her daughter to take over the business going forward. We have another client we're working with that it's actually, a conglomeration of a number of families, all with the shared grandfather that all went out and did their own thing. And so it's this very large family that is a bunch of independent businesses that are from the lineage of the same grandfather. And they all have, their kids and, grandkids in the business. And so it's great to see family business alive and well and going strong in America.
Love it. Such a great story. All right, give us a window. I really am curious. I mean, you're there. You're in the mix of these, I assume, hundreds of millions or 100 million. I think I saw that somewhere, but multi-million-dollar deals. Give us a window. What is that like when you're in the room and you're making the deal?
Well, I've negotiated throughout my career, advised on transactions as small as a couple of $1 million of transaction value to hundreds of millions of dollars of transaction value, billions when I was with Deloitte, and they were doing the larger deals. But for the course of my career at JD Ford and Company, they're mostly in the 25 to 250 million range. So that's sort of the scope. They're mostly privately held businesses. We don't represent publicly traded companies. From some time to time, we'll represent private equity firms in divesting their portfolio companies. But mostly we represent entrepreneurs and their families. And the founder mentality is, as unique in every business as you might imagine. So every deal is as unique as the people involved. The stress of the businesses of deal making is something that most people just really can't appreciate until they've been through it. Selling a business is the single most complicated business transaction that a entrepreneur can go through because it involves every element of their business, not just the financial side, not just the legal side, but the human capital side. And I don't just mean HR, it's the impact that it has on people that they've worked with for decades. Sometimes it impacts families that worked with their parents and they have been around the organization longer than they have. So there's a lot of emotion involved in a lot of these transactions, and it's not just about the money, and it's not just about the taxes, and it's not just about the structure. It's about the people. So every deal's different. The typical dynamic in the marketplace today is about 50% of all companies that are acquired by private equity firms. Now, private equity firms are filled with some of the smartest people that you will ever come across. They're brilliant analysts. They're very thorough. They have they're professional acquirers of businesses, and they have rules of engagement and how they proceed. Now, when we were doing deals with private equity firms back in the 80s, it was a little bit more the Wild West, and the private equity guys were entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial spirited, and they were still super smart, but they were risk takers. The world of private equity today is more of an asset management business, asset allocation, where the number one rule is never lose money. So the risk management processes are much more substantial in deals today than they ever were, which makes the selling of a business much more complicated. And one of the key roles that we play for our clients is to help them understand what is being asked of them, what impact their answers are likely to have on the deal, and what it means to them. I remember a flight back from Houston with a client back many years ago, and this was back when John Elway was still the quarterback for the Broncos, so it's been a long time. But we are coming back from a meeting in Houston. My client was the CEO of a family business. He had 9 brothers and sisters working in the business. They were all shareholders. His father had started the business with a partner. That partner absconded with the money, leaving the business and his family at great risk and at jeopardy. And he dropped out of college to go help dad, right? So he was not a financial engineer. He was just a hardworking guy who valued his family and his clients. And we were coming back from a meeting with a very sophisticated group of financiers, private equity group, and they were explaining with their PowerPoint how their structure worked and how the deal was going to come together and what it all meant. And we're flying back. Said, Joe, I didn't understand nearly any of what those guys had to say, but I feel pretty good because you're kind of my John Elway. I think you were reading their plays better than they were presenting them, and I think you can advise me of what to do, and we'll win the game. And at the end of the day, we did. We got a great deal done, not with that group, but with another group. And but that's really the role we play as trusted advisor, coach, psychologist, financial engineer, accounting advisor. Even though we're not providing accounting advice, it's having my baseline accounting background as a CPA has been a great resource for me personally in my career. But every deal is different. I can remember a time negotiating with Warren Buffett. He was a family jewelry chain out of Ohio. It was about 100 stores. It was a time when the jewelry business was up and down, and it was a second generation family business. The owner wanted to sell, much to the chagrin of his son, who thought he was going to be the third generation CEO. And we were talking to Helzberg Diamonds, which is owned by Berkshire Hathaway. And I remember getting a letter from having a call with the CEO of Helzberg, who said, this is really a great acquisition. We'd love to make it, but Mr. Buffett makes all decisions for acquisitions and any capital over a threshold, which I thought was very small threshold, candidly. But so we thought that was the end of it. We get a letter from Mr. Buffett, and it said, we're very interested in participating in a conversation with your client, but we don't participate in auctions. We're not going to be the highest bidder, but we're interested in the strategic acquisition if your client wants to chat. So, of course, I made the phone call to Berkshire Hathaway, and I asked for Mr. Buffett, and I thought that I would get a daisy chain of calls, and I spoke to one person, and that person passed me off to the next person, and then I thought, here we go. And then immediately on the phone was Warren Buffett, who knew exactly who I was, why I was calling, and probably understood what was in the materials that we had prepared better than I did. He was really on it. And we had a very good conversation, and he made an offer for the business that I thought was substantially lower than what the business was worth. And I said, candidly, with all due respect, Mr. Buffett, I can get my client twice that number from another bidder. And he said, well, then you should do that. So congratulations and good luck. And he said, but if your client would like to talk to me, I'd be happy to speak to him directly. Well, of course, my client wanted to speak to Warren Buffett, right? So we're on the phone call with my client and Mr. Buffett, and the two of them are talking about all the challenges in that particular industry at that particular time in history, and my client's agreeing with all the negative stuff that Mr. Buffett is pointing out, the industry trends. And if we had been in the same room, I would have kicked him, but we weren't. And so Buffett puts forward his proposal on the number, and my client said, well, Joe says he can get me twice that, and Buffett says, well, then maybe you should take that. But what I can tell you is, I won't require any due diligence. I have no financing contingency. I'll close in cash in 30 days. Let me know what you think. So that was the end of the call. And of course, my client was, gee, Joe, I mean, that's a great close. No due diligence, all cash, close in 30 days. Let's get it done. And I said, well, if you want to take, 50 million less than what your business is worth, then you should say yes. Because, well, how certain are you that the other guys are going to come through? Because it was an international buyer. And I said, well, Jeff, I feel very confident that they'll come through, but I'm 100% certain that if they don't, Mr. Buffett will still buy your business for the terms and conditions that he just outlined. And so we ended up going a different direction, and we got the $100 million, and I got a great story out of it. So those are just a couple of tidbits. I have, you do something long enough, and what you end up with is a lot of really good stories. So we could go on for hours, but I don't think that's what your audience wants to hear.
No, I thought that was awesome. I listened to a portion of a book by one of the Stephen Coveys, and it's called The Speed of Trust. Do you know the book by chance?
I have not read it, but I'm familiar with it. Yes.
There's a story that they share about Warren Buffett making a deal with, I don't know who. I want to say it's someone in the Walmart family, but I could be wrong on that. And the story was very similar to what you said of Warren Buffett did not require due diligence, financiers, or whatever the terms are. And it was almost more of a handshake deal. And it was for more than 50 million bucks. Like, it was a big deal. And the whole point of that story was that Warren Buffett operates in this realm of trust. People trust him for being a straight guy, and he was trusting others.
Well, a friend of mine was the Goldman Sachs investment banker that helped put together the Mars acquisition of Wrigley Gum. And at the same time, he was representing Mars in other acquisitions, one of which I was on the sell side. And I thought Mars was going to buy the company. But Mars, they just went dark. They didn't have any explanation. They just became unavailable. Well, the reason is because they were busy with a much more significant transaction, acquisition of Wrigley. And my friend told me that the financing commitment from Berkshire Hathaway to the Mars family was, we'll provide X billions of dollars on this date under these terms. It was a single page document for billions of dollars. So I think trust is a key attribute of great deal makers. One of the best deal makers I ever had the chance to interact with, a guy named George Gillette. Now, George was at one time CEO of Vail Resorts. He was also a one-time owner of the Harlem Globetrotters and part owner of the Miami Dolphins. And he was a great deal maker who, at age of 55, went personally bankrupt because he had done a deal that went bad. And so he went from being a billionaire at 55 to literally them taking his suits out of his closet. Now, fortunately, he was brilliant. So by the time he was 60, he was a billionaire again. But what I learned from George was his unique ability to quickly establish rapport. So he would walk into the conference room wearing a nice tie, an attractive jacket, sport coat, and slacks, and look very elegant and professional. But if the people in the room were not wearing ties, he would quickly lose the tie. If they weren't wearing jackets, he'd say, "Do you mind if I take my jacket off?" And he would roll up his sleeves and he would lean into the conversation. And within the first 30 minutes, they were best friends. And he was empathetic, and he listened, and he understood what it is that they're trying to do and why their business would be a good fit. And before those meetings were over, they wanted to do a deal with him. And he was, I won't say he won in every turn, but he was a brilliant deal maker, but a really good human, just a really excellent person. And even though he had gone bankrupt in a bad business deal, everybody who had done business with him got repaid. So he built a reputation of trust over decades of deal making. And I think that's where Mr. Buffett certainly is, and where many other great deal makers are. Another friend of mine who unfortunately passed away at too early an age was a great private equity investor, and a lot of private equity guys come into the room and they'll like to talk about EBITDA, especially the young guys. What's your EBITDA? What's your EBITDA? That, for those who don't know in the audience, that's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It's a financier's equivalent of cash flow. What's the cash flow of the business? EBITDA. And that's not the way founders run their business. That's not the way families run their business on EBITDA. They run it based on long-term decisions and proper investment and margins, customer satisfaction, and all the things that entrepreneurial folks do to build businesses really has very little to do with EBITDA. But many private equity guys like to lead with EBITDA. What's your EBITDA? Well, this gentleman, his name was Mark, and Mark would, he'd come in the room in jeans and a black T-shirt, and very casual, and he'd ask the question of, say, Darren, what's holding you back? What are the things you always wanted to do with your business that you haven't been able to do for either lack of capital or lack of resources? And of course, every entrepreneur, every founder, every family has a story about the things that they would have done, could have done, maybe someday still will do. And the business certainly has the capability of doing it if they can just get the right capital partner and the right partners at the table. And so Mark was excellent at identifying those growth opportunities. And he spent the time in those rooms with those business owners talking about the future, talking about what could be. And once those conversations were held, then it became a matter of, okay, how do we make that happen? Now, I can't give you everything you want, because if I give you everything you want, there won't be anything left for the future. So how do we bridge this gap, and how do we come together for a better future for your people, for your customers, for your suppliers, and all the other stakeholders that have added value to your business over the many years that you've owned. So I think what I've learned from being in the deal room with both great financial engineers and entrepreneurial deal makers and icons of industry, it's really all about people, developing rapport, developing trust, and developing a shared vision for the future that enables businesses to transact.
I want to go back to the Buffett story because I'm real interested in it. I know you can't speak for him, so I'm asking more about your expertise and the number of deals that you've been through. But how does Warren Buffett or someone like Warren Buffett establish a sense of rapport and trust in a buyer? I mean, say you're a jewelry guy or any person for that matter, when there's not a lot of history to really build upon. Like, how is that trust developed so quickly?
Well, Mr. Buffett's developed his reputation over decades, right? So, the trust is a given for him. He is a person who always does what he says he's going to do, and he doesn't overpromise, right? He also doesn't overpay. He's famous for saying, I like to go, get the fish in the barrel, but I wait till all the water's gone and all the other fishermen have left, right? Because then it's just a bowl full of fish, right? So he's a value buyer. He's a value buyer. So sometimes he's buying companies that other people don't see the future in. He once bought Shaw Industries, which is the largest carpet manufacturer in the world at the time, and still is a large carpet manufacturer behind Mohawk, I think. But I was also once in the carpet business, and I once sold a company to Shaw Industries after Mr. Buffett bought it. But in that industry, as in many, it's family businesses, and you develop rapport and trust. And so in the case of Mr. Buffett, he's built that reputation over a long period of time, just always doing what he says he's going to do. And he delivers what most can't, which is certainty of close. Now, I was just expressing to one of my clients before we got on this call about how we're going to approach an acquisition where we think we're competing with, private equity firms and some non-industry participants that want into the industry. And one of our core advantages is going to be that, we have deep industry expertise. We have less risk in due diligence because the client's already in the business, understands the dynamics of the business, and can come to the table with a much higher degree of certainty of close. Because what sellers really want when they finally reach the chasm, they cross the chasm of, I'm ready to part with that which I built. I've taken it as far as I can go. Once they make that decision, they're entrepreneurs. They want to get it done. They don't want to, there's a lot of investment bankers that like to talk about the process. the process, the process. Well, I've learned over the many decades that our clients don't pay us for process, they pay us for outcomes, right? And they want certainty of close. They want as smooth a process as they can get. And they want to trust the people that do not only that they're doing the deal with, but who are going to own their company after they're gone, because there is a legacy component. No one wants to see the business that they or their families built destroyed because of an over-leveraged transaction or private equity raider that's going to strip it down to the bones. That's a big fear of, I don't think that happens very much in private equity anymore, but that's still lingering fear. And so the the point is that you've got to build that trust over decades, and then you've got to do what you say you're going to do. And nothing erodes trust than failure to meet deadlines. I have another transaction that we're advising on and principal investor in, and we have a couple of really solid businesses under letter of intent that are founded by really great people. They're smaller businesses, so they don't have a lot of alternatives, but we have a great management team and a great strategy, and we're going to bring these companies together to form a bigger, more dominant player in the industry with some technology advancements that are lacking and will be differentiating in the industry. And we have some private equity partners that we started with that, they talked a big game, and then they ended up literally leaving us at the altar after everything was done. So fortunately, the management team and I were able to keep the sellers at the table because they trusted us. They knew that we couldn't write the check all by ourselves, but they trusted us that we would go get it. And so we're now in the process of getting those done. It's taking a little longer than anyone would like, but they're going to get done because the parties at the table trust one another.
And you live in a cool world.
It sounds better on a podcast than it does living on it some days.
I believe that fully. And yet the stories are fun and cool, right? You're impacting lives. You are involved in discussions that many people have no even window into outside of what we see on TV and the movies, which I'm sure has got plenty of dramatization going on.
Well, there can be plenty of drama in the deal business. There's no lack of drama. But I guess I have been blessed to have been in the decision making rooms, in the boardrooms, most of my career. Since I was a young guy in his early 20s, I was sitting at the table with people who were making the decision. So I had the chance to learn from a front row seat what took place. And I think one of the things at this stage in my career that I can bring to a transaction is the gravitas of experience. And when I speak to an issue, for the most part, it's from a solid foundation of knowledge, and a lot of experience. Now, some people don't think I'm as wise as I think I am, but my kids have learned the wisdom of their father is probably greater than what they thought it was too. But it's that every deal needs a champion, right? And every deal also needs what I'll call a dispensable gladiator, right? There's the people in the arena that are going to fight the battle that don't have to survive. Now, in a typical middle market acquisition, recapitalization, sale of a private equity firm, the selling shareholder, the founders, and the management team, they're going to have a continued relationship with the buyer. And they're going to have to continue to work together for some period of time, in some cases years. And therefore, they're not at liberty to say some of the hard things that need to be said. Because sometimes the truth is always the truth, but it doesn't always make friends, right? And so as a deal maker, sometimes I have to speak the hard truths that need to be said so that things can get done properly. But I'm dispensable. I don't need to survive the transaction, and that's part of the role. It's also part of the business that I like the least, candidly, because when when you're representing a founder in a family business, it's a very intimate process. You're going to spend a lot of hours over a long period of time, usually six to 18 months, 9 months being typical. You're going to be asking probing questions, and you're going to be hearing answers. Sometimes you hear answers of, this is the one thing that was the key to my success that I've never told anybody before. And they share their secret, right? And it's a very, valuable relationship, trusted relationship. And they share this because they need the feedback and how it's, how to present it. So you have these great, business relationships. But then the transaction invariably gets done. The wire transfer is confirmed. We used to get in the room and high five and have champagne, and now we have a Zoom call and say, hey, let's get together for dinner soon. And it's kind of done. And, the relationship quickly fades away as people move on to the next chapter in their life. And, we move on to the next, obligation that we've made to get another transaction closed. So it's the best part of the business is the people you get to represent. And the worst part about the business is that you don't really have a legitimate business need to continue that relationship. Now, of course, I'm fortunate that some of my clients have become dear friends, and we still have those relationships, but not everyone. And then occasionally there's a client you just can't wait to get their deal done. And it's a great business. I encouraged all of my children not to do it. It's a very intense business. I've been divorced twice, and the sacrifices you make as a deal maker, the time away from family, the distraction, the mental focus on something other than what you should be focusing on when you're home on a Sunday. It wears on everybody around you. I can remember specifically when my youngest son was about 4, and my oldest son was about 14, and we're at a lake up near Vail, and we're fishing, and of course I'm also on the phone, and so fishing while on the phone, and my older son says, sort of under his breath, I wish he'd just throw that thing in the lake, meaning my phone. And 10 minutes later or so, my little 4-year-old comes wandering up, and he's reaching into my pocket, trying to get my phone because he's going to throw it in the lake. And so the people who have been in my life, have been closest to me, have also paid a price for my my journey as an entrepreneurial deal maker. So for them, I offer the greatest thanks and appreciation for the sacrifices that they've made that enabled me to have the professional success that I've had.
I'm sorry to say we're at time in just a minute here, but I really appreciate where you've closed. On a smaller scale, I thought about the people who come and go in my life. One more recent of a couple years ago was my vet. Like, I had a dog for 15 years, and I saw this vet every single year. And not that I got close to him and did a deal or anything that intimate, but I knew his family, and I watched his business grow and his daughter go through college. And sure enough, as soon as my dog Marvin died, I haven't seen this dude in 2 or 3 years, So it's interesting for you to share it about the deal side. And I very much appreciate what you're saying about the sacrifices. And I recognize the impact of that word as opposed to compromise or negotiation. And hopefully you and your kids are feeling the love together now as you're older.
My kids and I are all great. I've truly been blessed. But what I would leave your audience with, and you, is, for those of you on the entrepreneurial journey, those of you who are the CEO or the founder or the senior executive team, the world's hard, business is hard, and you're going to be asked to make lots of personal sacrifices in order to be successful. And those sacrifices are worth it. But don't think you're doing it alone. Right? When you choose to make a sacrifice, the people around you are also making a sacrifice. So make sure they know how much you appreciate them and how much they mean to you, so that when it's all said and done and the accolades are all gone to the past, that the people who really matter are still there in your life.
Well said. Thanks for being with us, Joe. I enjoyed it.
Well, Darren, I really appreciate it, and I thank you for having me on, and I hope that your audience has some value from this conversation. I certainly did gather a lot of value from speaking to you, and I appreciate your interest.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a great afternoon. See you, everybody.
Bye.